I'm David Wilcock, and this is Wisdom Teachings. Are we seeing a dramatic genetic evolution in the human being at the DNA level that has taken place over the last 40,000 years? Has this change become even more dramatic in the last 5,000 years, moving 100 times faster? Are these same scientists now finding fossil remains of human beings that are only 200,000 years old, but appear the same as fossils from millions of years ago, suggesting everything we know about human evolution is wrong? Could we, in fact, find absolute proof that we are right now going through a quantum leap in human evolution, just like the ancient prophecies told us would be happening in this time of planetary ascension? These are the questions we're going to be answering in this week's episode. What we've got here is a truly amazing wealth of information that totally alters everything we thought we knew. We've looked at the idea that the genetic code is ultimately a geometric pattern, and geometry comes out of frequency. We've looked at cells of DNA growing in water where no DNA had existed before. We're seeing incredible species transformations from one into another, with Garyaev and his frog salamander experiment, with Kongang and his duck-chicken experiment, and with Ighena transforming apricots into apples on the actual branches of the trees, taking the tail of a rat, turning it into the tail of a cat, and so on and so forth. And now we've been looking at these amazing changes taking place in the actual human evolutionary process. One of the big names we looked at was Dr. James Flynn. And with his Flynn effect, we're seeing that there is an average increase of 3 IQ points per decade. This has happened in over 20 different countries. It's gone on for over a century, and it's the abstract nonverbal patterns where the increase is most striking, thus suggesting that this, in fact, is not due to literacy and us reading more newspapers and websites, but it has something to do with creativity and insight, things that are not commonly associated with literacy at all. And this change occurs in countries that are both literate and countries that are not literate. It's happening on that dramatic of a level. We also saw the incredible work of Dr. Richard Jantz, who was studying the skulls of human beings, in this case from America in the 1800s, and then comparing them to skulls in the 1980s, and found that a stunning increase in brain volume by the size of a tennis ball occurred in just 150 years. 200 cubic centimeters for men, 180 cubic centimeters for women. The faces are becoming longer and narrower. The head is actually getting larger, and you can measure this in the actual length of the skull, top to bottom, which is increasing compared to the overall increase in height that we are also going through. Well, think about those weird little grays, right? And think about how big their heads are. Or think about these pre-Adamite beings with their elongated skulls, where the brain volume is almost twice the size of what it is now. Are we actually going through changes at this time that will eventually lead to something like that? Well, that's possible. That could be what's going on. That as humans evolve, their heads keep getting larger and larger, the brain gets larger, and with the Flynn effect, we also see the IQ going up. We're still missing a very essential component here. Yes, we've got the brain volume going up. Yes, we've got the IQ going up. Those are amazing. But what we're missing is the actual proof that something is happening down at the genetic level. Is there a way that we could actually test our own DNA and find out if, in fact, human evolution is trackable in the DNA molecule itself? And this is an interesting question because as you've been watching this show, everything we thought we knew about DNA is changing. DNA no longer is just something that occurs as a result of matter. We saw Dr. Vadim Tsaidovich, who actually created that simulation of plasma out in outer space and showed that when dust is thrown in there, it creates helical structures which actually look like DNA. Just the dust in space is naturally forming DNA-like structures, and they copy each other, they reproduce, and they even evolve. This is one of many things that I've showed you suggesting that DNA is ultimately built into the basic patterns of the universe. So if we are evolving, then there could be an underlying energetic template that's responsible for that, just like the Italian Tesla Pierluigi Igina suggested in his work, finding some sort of what he thought was a magnetic atom that underlies biological life. And again, this is applied science. If we could rebuild his devices and start turning apricots into apples on a tree and document that in modern times with the power of the internet, the game is over. We could get Gary Yaev over here from Russia and start to redo the experiments of growing organs in people who are about to die. So this isn't just something that's fun. This is actually an applied science that can lead to stunning increases in our health, stunning increases in our longevity, and a much greater insight into what it truly means to be alive in a physical body and where we are going as a planet with this so-called ascension, the prophecies of human evolution. We don't have to wonder anymore. What we're getting into right now is really the crown jewel of everything that I've been telling you throughout the entire time that I've been doing this show. We've talked about galactic energy domains. We've talked about these ripples of energy expanding out from the center of the galaxy, and that as they hit a star, the star's light output fundamentally changes on a quantum level, meaning that the actual rate of time itself and the plane of existence that's around that star actually shifts. These are very, very compelling things. Interplanetary climate change is very, very shocking because it totally fits with what the ancient cultures told us was going to happen. If you only see it as mythology, you're missing the point. This was written by extraterrestrials that have larger heads, that have more advanced technology, that have solved all the problems of science that we're still tinkering with, and we don't understand everything. Scientists, even after the Wright brothers had flown the airplane, said heavier than air flight is impossible. They'd take a rock and throw it up into the air and laugh as it fell down, saying this is impossible for anything to fly. All they have to do is look at birds, and they can see that birds are heavier than air, and they fly. Oh, heavier than air flight is impossible. And they had these very elaborate equations where they calculated how much weight it would take for a steam engine to be in an aircraft, and that the weight of the steam engine would make it impossible for the aircraft to fly. Very advanced mathematical models of this, and of course the Wright brothers had proven them wrong. So science is not necessarily about the truth, it's about who's able to win the arm wrestling match and slam down the opponent. And that has to do with foundations and grants and universities and peer review and the academic critique of skeptics who like to sit on their ivory tower and say, well, this has been discredited. You remember when I interviewed Rupert Sheldrake for Disclosure, and one of the shocking things that he said in those episodes was that he infiltrated a skeptics forum in which they were training people who had no medical or PhD degrees of any kind to go in and rip apart the work of credentialed PhDs by saying, without any evidence at all, by the way, to just confidently state this has been discredited. They don't need to have any evidence, they simply need to confidently state that opinion, and they are also taught to be sarcastic and to ridicule the people that make the discoveries. Most of us are not going to do the due diligence to actually check to see if this is true, but the person who is funny, the person who is snarky, the person who is sarcastic, the person who reinforces our traditional beliefs tends to win the argument. That's why I'm trying to change the belief system. We're not doing this with a multi-$100,000 budget episode here. This is a grassroots effort that we are doing here at Gaia. We are bringing this information to you because we feel that it is compelling, we feel that it is groundbreaking and world transforming, and that information needs to get out in some form. But as you can see, it needs to go so much farther than what I'm doing right now. We need to bring these people together, we need to interview them, there needs to be consortiums where they talk to each other and they compare their notes. But the problem is, if you listen to the prophecies of ascension, the things that Corey Good and others have told us, we don't have very long before this solar flash is going to happen. We don't have time to get stodgy old academics to put down their cigars and start to actually talk to each other and maybe eventually agree on some of the ways that all their information integrates together. But when you combine all of these things, when you connect the dots, you get a stunning hidden picture that you never would have thought was possible to be there, and yet it pops out and it's right in your face. It's a unified model in which every aspect of the argument has been delivered scientifically. We don't have to wonder about whether this is true. We don't have to listen to someone who said they channeled something. This is a fact. And when we look at the facts, we see the IQ scores are going up very dramatically, 3 points per decade. An IQ of 100 is average, okay? So this is the key. The IQ score is calibrated based on a certain number of people, our average, and that's the 100. Lower than that is still going to encompass some of the people, so there will be people with an IQ of 90, an IQ of 80, and so on. And then as it goes up from there, every 10 points is considered in statistics one standard deviation. And believe me, I hated statistics class. We're not going to go through that very much. But it's a bell curve. So every 10 points, the bell curve gets smaller and smaller. So even by the time you're at 130 or 140, the curve is getting very small. This is a very small number of people. But the problem is that people's IQs are going up so dramatically that they have to keep changing what a score of 100 is and how hard it is to get that score. It becomes harder and harder and harder to get a 100 because everybody is becoming smarter. So that means that if you got a 100 in the late 1800s, now 3 points per decade, right? So after 10 decades or 1 century, that's 30 points different. So if you got a 100 in the year 1900, you might now only get a 70. It's literally that different. We don't seem to be smarter. There seems to be a lot of really dumb stuff going on here, but yet the evidence actually shows that that's happening. And look at the brain volume. Look at the actual skull. The brain is just getting larger. Now, a tennis ball mass is a pretty big size. That's bigger than the size of the brains of our pets. That's bigger than the size of a lot of brains in the animal kingdom. And it's a massive amount of new brain volume. And we don't ever usually think about this. But we need to see if the DNA molecule adds up to it, and we find the same thing there. And that's where we get to the stunning work of the University of Wisconsin anthropologist Dr. John Hawkes, studying rapid evolution at the DNA level. Now here's what he looks like. He looks a lot like a jazz piano friend of mine, actually. And here he is out in the wild in front of this cave that he's done some amazing work at. And here is Dr. John Hawkes with one of many skulls of older types of human beings that he has studied in the course of his work, where he's actually taking DNA testing from these skulls, looking for genetic markers to see if humans are evolving. Now, I want to give you some of his biography because he's a very important person in all of this. This is off of his website, johnhawks.net. He said, "I am a paleoanthropologist and I study the bones and genes of ancient humans. I've worked on almost every part of our evolutionary story, from the very origin of our lineage among the apes up to the last 10,000 years of our history. My work has taken me to Africa, Asia, and Europe, where I have measured thousands of bones and investigated dozens of archaeological sites." That's really impressive. "In my lab, we use the bioinformatics methods to work with whole genome sequences from thousands of living people and a few ancient ones." So you can see already here, this guy is no slouch. He is one of the leading anthropologists today, and he's not just sitting there pushing pencils behind a desk. He is actively going out and doing the field work. He's going all over the world. He's going to where the exciting discoveries are being made, like the Denisovans. He's been there, and he's been to many other places, and he is taking out the artifacts, and he's actually testing their DNA. So you literally could not ask for a better paleoanthropologist than this. This guy is the SEAL team. He is the A-list. And so when he makes discoveries like this, we need to listen. Let's read a little more of his bio now. "We're interested in uncovering the patterns of relationships that connect people and the subtle changes by which we adapted to our ancient environments. I'm an expert in population dynamics and the process of, there it is, natural selection on both genes and morphological traits. Okay, I'm not going to harsh on this guy because he's great. Okay, we love John Hawkes. But natural selection is a Darwinian term, and we have to forgive him because he's coming out of the mainstream academic paradigm. Natural selection is Darwin's term, which means that animals are killing each other, and that's called selection. Selection is only the strong survive. Those who are the most adept at killing are those who are selected naturally to be the strongest and the best. That is a belief system of the so-called Illuminati or Cabal. And it is something worth pointing out that Charles Darwin's father was a 33rd degree Mason, which is as high up as it goes. Now, we don't have any direct proof that Charles Darwin was a 33rd degree Mason, but it's very likely, and that it was just exceptionally well concealed. Darwin, therefore, is not an unbiased, objective observer of what's going on. He very likely was fulfilling a hidden political agenda by the world's elite. Because think about how Darwinian theory has changed what we believe. We now say that those who are the best killers are the most evolved. Those who are most adept at removing life are at the highest end of evolution. Well, that's exactly what the Cabal thinks. It is not something I agree with. So when you hear natural selection, for me, it's like a PTSD, just have this very gut-wrenching reaction to it. But again, most people have not been exposed to this unified view where we're not making anything up, we're just taking what different scientists have discovered and we're putting it together and we're making a new model. And that model has been taught to us actually by alleged extraterrestrial intelligence because, as you've heard me say so many times, so much of everything that I'm telling you was already laid out in the Law of One series, which came in from 1981 to 1984. And I had read 300 books by the time I got into the Law of One and found out that I hardly knew anything. So it's not like I thought of all this either. The Law of One laid out a lot of very specific stuff. The things that Corey Goode has said on cosmic disclosure dovetail beautifully with the Law of One. And the Law of One gives us this unified scientific model, which we can then take and develop and find real data that didn't even exist in 1981 when most of this was done, or 1984 for that matter. And now the findings keep backing it up. So all you got to do is just put the puzzle together. All the pieces are there, and John Hawkes is an amazing guy, so we'll forgive him for saying natural selection and move on. I've used my work in genetics and skeletal biology to form rich collaborations with colleagues in 12 countries. That's impressive. I love to discover new friends in new places, and he's obviously getting the money to do this, which is great. My academic position is the Vilas Borghese Distinguished Achievement Professor of Anthropology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Right now, I'm Associate Chair of Anthropology and an Associate Member of both the Department of Zoology and the J.F. Crow Institute for the Study of Evolution. So I'm putting those credentials in there just to let you see even more clearly that this is a distinguished professor, somebody with impeccable credentials, one of the leading anthropologists of our time, and some of his discoveries we're about to get into don't even encompass the DNA evolution of our own genetics, but they're equally relevant. In 2013, we recovered more than 1,200 hominin specimens. And hominin is a word that means similar to hominid. They've changed it a little bit, but it's the same idea. It's a human-like specimen. More than 1,200 hominin specimens from the Rising Star Cave System in the Cradle of Humankind, South Africa, in an expedition led by Lee Berger of the University of the Witwatersrand. In May 2014, we convened a workshop of early career scientists to carry out the first description and analysis of the fossils. And this is kind of a funny term, early career scientists. Basically a funny way of saying kids who are either still getting their doctorate or have just graduated, who actually are the types that would want to go off to South Africa and play around in a cave and spend, paleontology, think about it. I wouldn't be able to do it. It's so boring, this idea of just, you got to dig through the dirt and you got to do it with a paintbrush, right? Because you're dusting off little bits of dust, and you could be there for days and days and days unearthing one bone. That takes incredible patience incredible dedication. You have to really, really want it. So early career scientists are the types that maybe haven't settled into the sedentary middle-aged life, and they're adventurous and they're willing to go and do this painstaking work. Because you can't just rip something out of the ground. You have to be so delicate in how every little piece is handled. With more than 30 early career scientists, quote, from 15 countries, we had an exciting time opening this exceptional sample in the new vault at the University of the Witwatersrand. We are now preparing our research for publication. So here's some of the early career scientists, and they're there with the skulls. And, you know, I'm not dissing them. I mean, it's great that there's people willing to do that, to dig through that dirt with a paintbrush. I mean, that's not me. Now, in 2017, things got very interesting when they discovered the largest single collection of early hominin fossils. And this has everything to do with defeating the Darwinian view of gradual human evolution. This is mind-blowing, and I'm really amazed nobody's talking about it. Take a look. We're going to see now this article from BBC News, which is actually quite understated, where it says, primitive human lived much more recently, from April 25th, 2017. Well, check this out. This is unbelievable. A primitive type of human, once thought to be up to 3 million years old, actually lived much more recently, a study suggests. The remains of 15 partial skeletons belonging to the new species Homo naledi were discovered in 2015. They were found deep in a cave system in South Africa by a team led by Lee Berger from Wits University. And of course, Dr. John Hawkes was part of Lee Berger's team. And this article will name drop him in just a minute. So you're finding these fossils that are supposedly many millions of years, at least 2-3 million years old, based on conventional Darwinian evolution. That's not what happened. Check it out. In an interview, he now says these remains are probably just 200,000 to 300,000 years old. What? Am I doing this show, or am I just like in another parallel universe here? Remains of people, the people with the small brains, 1/3 the size of us, the caveman, the clunky guy that's supposed to be 2 or 3 million years ago, is now showing up unequivocally 200 to 300,000 years ago, which is right in the middle of Neanderthal, the dawning of Cro-Magnon, the dawning of modern humans. And you have these little guys that are upright and they're human-like, but they're totally out of place in the fossil record. Dude, that totally defeats the whole anthropological idea of the ape coming into existence gradually. At the very least, you have to say that some of these other guys did not evolve like the rest, and they just hung around. But here's another thing. What if they didn't evolve? What if those humans stayed the same, and the people that we think are humans that evolved out of them really were just dropped off here as extraterrestrials? Or what if extraterrestrials mixed their DNA with certain people but left other people alone? And those other people continued to breed, and they didn't really change that much. So this is very, very bizarre, because we're used to thinking that all humans went through this change. And the Darwinian model says, well, yes, it's natural selection. Those little guys with the small brains, they weren't good at killing because they weren't smart enough, so all the others came and hunted them down and killed them off. Or, well, let's say that the weather changed and climate changed and you had to be smarter because you got cold or you're too hot, and so you got to hide in a cave somewhere, but these dumb guys, they didn't know what the hell to do. Dude, now, wait a minute. The 3 million years that they were supposedly died out in, they lived. So all those arguments fall apart. They were fine. They didn't get killed off by people with bigger brains. They didn't get killed off by the weather. And there was no natural selection. They stayed alive for a very long time. And it's also interesting that in this cave they had signs of ritual burial. So these people were a lot smarter than they were supposed to be as well, even though their brain was only 1/3 the size of us. Now let's keep reading. Although its anatomy shares some similarities with modern people, other anatomical features of Homo naledi hark back to humans that lived in much earlier times, 2 million years ago, 3 million years ago, or more. Very embarrassing for these guys. These look like a primitive form of our own genus Homo. It looks like it might be connected to early Homo erectus or Homo habilis, Homo rudolfensis, said Professor Berger's colleague John Hawkes, there he is, from the University of Wisconsin. So it looks like some of the oldest guys that we have in our conventional fossil tree. But it's only a couple 100,000 years ago. Very bizarre. Although some experts guessed that Naledi could have lived relatively recently, in 2015 Professor Berger told BBC News that the remains could be up to 3 million years old. He's got to cling to the past. New dating evidence places the species in a time period where Homo naledi could have overlapped with early examples of our own kind, Homo sapiens. If this lineage, which looks like it originated 2 million years ago, was still hanging around 200,000 years ago, then maybe that's not the end of it. This is John Hawkes talking. We haven't found the last Homo naledi, we've only found one. So look at how different they are from the way that we look at the same type of size, relatively speaking. On the bottom you see they have small teeth that are more human-like than like an ape. They have a skull that is similar in shape to a human's, except they have that pronounced caveman type of brow. Notice the skull is a little more elongated in terms of how it slopes back, but the brain is only a third the size of ours. So this is very interesting, and notice again John Hawkes is the source there. Now we're seeing a comparison of a Homo naledi hand on the left with a human hand on the right, and there are some differences, but they're pretty darn surprisingly similar. The wrist and palm is very similar to ours, but the fingers are more curved. Again, very, very interesting. And then we look at the naledi foot to the human foot, we see that it's a short foot similar to ours, but notice that the toes are shorter than our toes would be. At least maybe they haven't found the other bones yet, that could be. But the arch suggests that they actually walked on 2 feet. The naledi remains were uncovered in 2013 inside a difficult-to-access chamber within the Rising Star cave system. At the time, Professor Berger said he believed the remains had been deposited in the chamber deliberately, perhaps over generations. And that is very important because these Homo naledis are not supposed to be able to do ritual behavior like burying their dead deliberately. So they're a lot smarter than we think they are. So this is the Rising Star cave system, and on the right you have D. naledi chamber, then Berger's box, a 25-centimeter squeeze named after Professor Lee Berger, got stuck in it in 2014. And then you see down here, pinch and punch, location of adult male skeleton neo, location of an infant. This is where all this amazing stuff was found in South Africa. This idea of the ritual burials, which would suggest that Homo naledi was capable of ritual behavior, obviously met with controversy because such practices are thought by some anthropologists to be a characteristic of modern human beings. So this totally violates everything that we thought we knew about the way that human evolution is supposed to work. It's not something that's happening gradually. These guys were still around 200,000 years ago. And even though it's been carbon dated and they know that, they have to say, well, maybe they just called it, and maybe it was a really ancient grave site that somebody came back to much later. No, I don't think so. So in the last few minutes of this episode, I want to share with you the beginning of what John Hawkes did in 2007 with his stunning discoveries regarding human genetic evolution. Let's take a look. This again came from the BBC, where it says, human evolution is speeding up. Humans have moved into the evolutionary fast lane and are becoming increasingly different, a genetic study suggests. So Hawkes was studying what he called, again, positive selection, a Darwinian term, which means rapid evolution. And the upshot of this article is that it tells you human evolution is now moving 100 times faster in the last 5,000 years alone. And the last 40,000 years, he says, have been a time of supercharged evolutionary change. There have been a lot more humans on Earth since the last 50,000 years. And in the Law of One, they explain that there's these sudden evolutionary bursts, these ascension vortices, that happen after the 25,000-year cycle is complete. They never talked about the solar flash, but many prophecies obviously show that's what they're expecting. But the idea here is that we are genetically evolving, and he has the DNA traces of that. Now look at this last one here. We are more genetically different from people of 5,000 years ago than they were from the Neanderthals. Now check this out. John Hawkes is one of the top anthropologists in the world. And when I was writing Source Field Investigations, if you go back and look at the cover, you will notice that I got an endorsement from Graham Hancock himself in which he said that the book was magnificent. That was not easy to get. That was the great anointing. It's not like that happens very often. For somebody like Graham Hancock to tell me that my work was magnificent, and I had over 1,000 academic references in one book, I was very, very honored and impressed that that even happened at all. But here's the thing. Graham Hancock was so tweaked by that one thing that I just read you, where people from 5,000 years ago were closer to Neanderthal DNA than they were to us, that he almost withdrew his endorsement. He was trying to force me to take that out of the book because he thought it was totally preposterous. Clearly, he thought somebody from 3000 BC is going to look more in their face like us than they would like a Neanderthal. We have pictures of the pharaohs from Egypt, and they don't look like this big caveman kind of thing, right? So I said, Graham, you can't look at the way the face looks. This is one of the premier anthropologists in the world. You're looking at the DNA. You're looking at the genetic code. And it's on the DNA level where people from 3000 BC, their DNA is more similar to a Neanderthal than it actually is to us. The stunning implications of John Hawke's research is that the DNA molecule has transformed by a whopping 7% in just the last 5,000 years. And when you consider how complex DNA is, a 7% change is overwhelmingly massive. And this is really the key. We've seen the changes in the brain volume, in the skull. We've seen the increases in the IQ. And now we're looking at direct genetic proof. So something is going on because some types of humans did not change. They stayed the way they were, but others got the magic wand. And so maybe it's possible that this ascension process is selective. Some people ascend and go through a genetic transformation, and others don't. And then the question is, what authorizes that genetic transformation? Is it the choices that we make? As I was saying in previous episodes about the power of the spoken word, is it how we speak? Is it the way that we use vibrational frequencies in our voices? Is that what determines whether some people get the magic wand and others do not? How much of this is the result of ETs interbreeding with us, taking certain people that otherwise would have basically stayed the same and blending their DNA so that all of a sudden there's no missing link, the brain volume doubles in size, and you get an anatomically modern human. What does it really mean to be human? Well, these questions are very compelling, and now finally we're at the point, starting in the next episode, where we can get into a much greater analysis of the entire fossil record that has been found from two paleontologists, in this case from University of Chicago, David Raup and James Sepkoski. And those guys have found something totally amazing. You go back to the dawn of all life on Earth, and it turns out that species are appearing in cycles. And there's hardly anything that happens in between. This will blow your mind. Do not miss the next episode of Wisdom Teachings, bringing you the information that you need that will set you free. I'm David Wilcock, and I thank you for watching.
you.